Charlie Munger famously claimed that the first $100,000 is a total nightmare to accumulate. Statistics from the Federal Reserve suggest that reaching this specific six-figure milestone represents the hardest psychological and mathematical hurdle in a person's entire financial journey. Once the threshold is crossed, the laws of compound interest shift from a slow crawl to a sprinting pace that can change a person's life forever. This analysis breaks down the brutal physics of the first 100,000, revealing why the initial climb takes the most effort, and how the momentum of capital eventually does the heavy lifting for anyone disciplined enough to stay the course. Understanding these mechanics is the difference between a lifetime of labor and true financial independence. The primary reason the first 100,000 feels impossible is that the contribution of interest is negligible at low balances. If an account has $10,000 and earns a 7% annual return, the gain is only $700, which is barely enough to cover a month of groceries in many American cities. In the early stages of wealth building, nearly 100% of a portfolio's growth comes from active labor rather than investment performance. Data shows that for a worker starting at zero, the struggle is entirely focused on the gap between what is earned at a job and what is spent on survival, leaving very little room for error. However, the math changes drastically once the balance scales. At a 7% return, $100,000 generates $7,000 a year in passive growth, which is often more than an average employee can contribute from their paycheck alone after taxes and expenses. This is the moment capital starts to act like a second employee working for the household. The timeline to reach the first milestone is often double the time it takes to reach the second. Historical market data suggests that while the first 100,000 might take 8 to 10 years for a typical saver, the jump from 100,000 to 200,000 often takes less than 5 years, provided the same contribution rate is maintained. This phenomenon is known as the compounding snowball effect, where the surface area of the wealth base becomes large enough to collect more gains with every rotation. But here's where it gets interesting. The second reason the first six figures are so difficult is the crushing weight of fixed expenses relative to income. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average American household spends nearly 70% of their after-tax income on housing, transportation, and food, leaving a slim margin for building any kind of capital base. When an individual is earning a median salary, every dollar saved requires a massive sacrifice in lifestyle, but as income grows and the first 100,000 is secured, these fixed costs occupy a smaller percentage of the total financial picture. This allows for an accelerated savings rate that was previously mathematically impossible. Inflation also plays a predatory role in the early stages of wealth building. For a person with only $5,000 in savings, an 8% rise in consumer prices can feel like a devastating blow to their purchasing power, whereas someone with a diversified six-figure portfolio may see their asset values rise alongside inflation, protecting their net worth. Furthermore, the tax code in many developed nations often favors those with capital over those with only labor income. While a worker's wages are taxed at ordinary income rates immediately, the growth on that first $100,000 can often be deferred in retirement accounts or taxed at lower long-term capital gains rates, creating a more efficient path forward. The initial phase is essentially a fight against the friction of modern life, where every system is designed to extract the small amount of surplus cash a worker manages to generate. The data tells a different story once that friction is overcome. There is a psychological shift that occurs once the $100,000 mark is reached, often described by behavioral economists as the endowment effect. When a person sees a six-figure balance, their perceived cost of a frivolous purchase increases because they now understand the opportunity cost of that capital. Before this point, many people suffer from small balance syndrome, where they feel that their tiny contributions don't matter, leading to inconsistent habits. But once the balance hits 100,000, a 10% market swing results in a $10,000 change in net worth, which is enough to grab anyone's full attention and reinforce disciplined behavior. This stage also opens doors to more sophisticated financial tools. While a person with $10,000 might be limited to basic savings accounts or simple ETFs, an individual with a larger base can sometimes access better credit terms, lower insurance premiums, and more diverse asset classes that further accelerate their growth rate. It is the transition from saving to investing. Saving is the act of not spending, which requires constant willpower. Investing is the act of deploying capital to do work, which eventually requires no willpower at all as the system becomes self-sustaining. Most people give up in the first 3 years because they don't see the needle moving, unaware that they are in the gestation period of wealth. But for those who break through, the velocity of their money begins to outpace the effort of their hands. In physics, escape velocity is the speed required to break free from a planet's gravitational pull without further propulsion. In personal finance, $100,000 is the point where an individual begins to break free from the gravity of a paycheck-to-paycheck existence. At this level, even modest annual contributions combined with market returns can lead to an exponential explosion in net worth. If a person reaches $100,000 at age 30 and never adds another penny, that sum could grow to over $800,000 by age 60, assuming a historical average return of 7%. The real power comes when the saver continues to contribute. The combination of a large existing base and ongoing deposits creates a compounding force that is nearly impossible to stop, often resulting in the second and third 100,000 arriving in a fraction of the time it took for the first. Studies in wealth management show that the habits required to save the first 100,000, frugality, consistency, and long-term thinking, are the exact same traits required to manage millions. The struggle isn't just about the money. It is about the transformation of the person managing it. The difficulty of the first 100,000 is a feature, not a bug. It serves as the ultimate filter that separates those who merely wish for wealth from those who have built the foundation to sustain it for a lifetime. The first $100,000 is the hardest because it requires the most personal labor and the highest degree of discipline before the powerful engine of compound interest finally takes over the heavy lifting. If this analysis changed how you think about the early stages of wealth, the next video breaks down the specific asset classes most commonly used to cross the six-figure finish line.